everyone, welcome to another episode of GUcast. I'm Dr. Renu Eapen, urologist at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre here in Melbourne. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Professor Declan Murphy, also from Peter Mac. We have a very special episode of GUcast today, don't we, Declan?
Yes, so we're welcoming a couple of our colleagues at Peter Mac and indeed from the Garvan in Sydney who've just had a nice paper accepted in the BJUI. And the BJUI always welcomes short videos to accompany these pieces, so we're delighted to bring you a video today from the authors of this paper, which is a spin-off of the primary trial. We welcome Associate Professor Daniel Moon and Professor Louise Emmett, and they're going to be interviewed by BJUI Associate Editor Dr. Viru Kazi. So great to have them on this mini version of GUcast, and we hope you enjoy their video.
Fantastic.
So hi Dan and Louise, today we're going to talk to you about a paper which has just been accepted in the BJUI, and I was handling editor of the paper, and we're really excited to have it published in the journal. So it was based on a study called Primary, and looking specifically at a group of patients in the study. And Louise, I wanted to say congratulations for the Primary study, which was just awarded Scientific Paper of the Year for 2022 in European Urology. Do you want to tell us a bit about the study and its main findings and how it relates to the paper you've just published in BJUI?
Yeah, sure. So the primary trial is really very simple concept. It's the idea whether PSMA-PET can actually add value to MRI in the diagnosis of prostate cancer. So we took patients who had an MRI and were going for a transperineal template biopsy, and we really just slotted in a pelvic-only PSMA-PET CT. And what we found in the trial is if you use PSMA and MRI together in the diagnosis of prostate cancer, you actually improve the sensitivity and you improve the negative predictive value. So negative predictive value improved from 71% up to 92% from MRI up to the combination of PSMA and MRI. And we had a sensitivity improving from 83% up to 97%. That fantastic sensitivity and negative predictive value means there's a proportion of men who could safely avoid biopsy. And that group really looked like it was in those patients who had high-risk PI-RADS 2 or PI-RADS 3 with negative PSMA PET scans. So the big question is, can we use the combination of MRI and PSMA to safely avoid biopsy over and above what you've already done in the PRECISION trial?
Okay, great. So in this paper that you published in BJUI, you speak specifically about the PI-RADS 4s and 5s and how the PSMA-PET with a particular SUVmax might influence how you manage that patient. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
So I'll talk about the primary findings in the 4s and 5s, and then perhaps Dan can talk about this paper and what he thinks. But in the primary trial, in patients who had PI-RADS 4 or 5, we found that they had bright PSMA avid disease. So in a PI-RADS 4 or 5, if you had a PSMA of SUVmax of greater than 9, 100% of those patients actually had clinically significant malignancy, and if you had an SUVmax of greater than 12, 100% of patients had clinically significant malignancy independent of what we found in the MRI. It's really tantalising, and I think Dan can really explain how clinically significant that is.
The exciting thing about primary is that we introduced this level of diagnostic certainty based on imaging alone that we've never had for prostate cancer. Bear in mind, we come not that long ago from an era of PSA testing and blind biopsy. So MRI is a great step forward, but it's not perfect. And we have this group of patients consistently who are MRI negative, but we know ultimately turn out to have significant cancers. There are men still who are being biopsied unnecessarily who could be reassured they don't have cancer. And we have more insignificant cancer being diagnosed than should be. So adding PET scanning to this algorithm gives us this 97% sensitivity is astounding. It gives us this diagnostic certainty, and it's in these two extremes of men. So primary 2, which is the next iteration of primary, looks at the PI-RADS 2 and 3s and the use of a PET scan to help clarify whether these men could either avoid a biopsy or whether they can have a targeted biopsy and diagnose cancer. That's one end of the spectrum. But this paper that we've just published looks at the other end. What about those men who have a PI-RADS 4 or 5 on MRI, have a clearly high, intense SUVmax lesion on PSMA-PET, and all other risk factors pointing to prostate cancer, if they're candidates for surgical treatment, could you controversially just proceed directly to treatment based on the imaging alone? And that's what we're looking at. This has been published, by the way, in European Urology in a small series that's in the last 6 months. I've also, certainly myself, anecdotal reports of men just proceeding straight to treatment. We're not postulating, we're not performing this on men at the moment. What we're doing is using really well collected prospective data to answer that question, to say, could there be a group of men in whom you have that level of certainty that you just go straight to treatment?
And where do you think we're headed, Dan? Do you think it's safe to take that approach? What about if you're thinking about other treatments like radiotherapy?
Well, of course, this is where we're just opening the debate. And we know it's a can of worms. And we're really trying to rattle a cage here, I think, and just show off how good this combination, how powerful it is when put together to use this level of diagnostic certainty. This is clearly a minority of patients, but I do have men who come to me who have palpable disease, PI-RADS 5, PSA 20, SUVmax 20 on a PET scanning, and they would say, why do I have to have the biopsy? Can we not just have this treated? And I guess our paper is poking that bear and seeing what people think.
And you mentioned SUVmax. Louise, I might ask you about that. So our listeners might want to know, are the SUV thresholds you used in the paper, can they apply that to their practice and their scanners?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I actually think we need to. So the primary trial was really a preliminary evaluation of how we can use PSMA-PET. We had harmonised cameras, and we used just gallium PSMA-11 in the primary trial. So the answer is, if you don't have a harmonised camera with the ARTNet certification in Australia, and you don't use gallium PSMA-11, I would have to say no. So one of the things we've done in the primary trial is we've actually gone on and we've done more evaluation of patterns of uptake on PSMA-PET, and we're developing new ways of reading intraprostatically for PSMA. So I think primary trial is very interesting. I think it really raises a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I don't think it's ready for prime time, in my opinion. I personally, I wouldn't like to tell someone in the US using DCF-PYL, if they've got an SUVmax greater than 9, that they should be avoiding biopsy. But, perhaps we'll get there.
So a question to both of you then. So what are the next steps? How do we get there?
Well, this is, as Louise has exactly rightly pointed out, this is hypothesis generating, really. And the next step is to do more work. A lot of it is standardising reporting. What has happened now worldwide, PET scanning is springing up all over the place to different scanners, different techniques, different quality control, different image acquisition time. It will all give you different results, and let alone how you interpret what you call positive, the SUV, the intraprostatic pattern of uptake. All this needs to be standardised so that we're comparing apples with apples when we're discussing PET scanning, reporting and findings. And that's where the primary trial produces a lot of data that we can now take that next step. So primary 2 will be looking at one cohort. The primary score that's just being accepted for publication looks at how we should standardise reporting of intraprostatic malignancy.
I actually think we need to do a lot of validation studies. So we can take things like the primary score, which instead of using intensity is actually using pattern. And then we need to validate that across different ligands, on different cameras, and in real-world practice compared to biopsy, and get a lot more information on how accurate it is. And so that, for me, is the next step, is real-world validation of these hypotheses.
So I think both of you make really good points. And as we've seen from the MRI literature, looking at the quality of your scans and how people conduct them when it becomes more mainstream is really important. And looking at how you report those specific scans and using scoring systems that can be standardised will help us get to maybe answer those questions that we've raised today.